Hello there, everybody. My name is Ashley Hunt. I'm a Senior Project Management Instructor here at StormWind Studios, and I want to talk about agile techniques to manage changes and come out ahead. Things are changing rapidly, right? The world that we're living in right now, I'm sure you have experienced so many changes, either in the way that you work, working from home, maybe going back to work. Some of these changes that we're dealing with on a regular basis, and also changes in our projects and things that are adapting and adjusting because of the way that the world is. So let's talk about some of those best practices. Before we do that, though, if you're not familiar with Agile, what is it? Where did it come from? And what is all of this Agile talk? What is Scrum? What's extreme programming? So let's go back to the very beginning. Think about the technological world in 2001. Okay, 2001. At that point in time, the world was transitioning from the industrial age into the technological age. So internet and dial-up and starting to get into broadband and so on. But a lot of these manufacturing and industrial plants were also trying to automate their systems. And software development was just a baby in its infancy at that time. So 17 software developers got together in Snowbird, Utah, and formed what's known today as the Agile Alliance and created the Agile Manifesto. They were frustrated because they were trying to use predictive, heavy types of best practices for project management that work in manufacturing and construction, but they weren't working in software development. So they all got together to discuss, how can we improve this and retain our sanity at the same time? So it's based on iterative and incremental development. Piece until you get to done. Higher quality software in shorter time frames. Requirements evolve through collaboration and self-organizing cross-functional teams. Collaboration, that's huge. You're not just pulling in, we know the scope of work, it's going to be a bicycle, and planning toward it. You're like, we know we need a payroll system that's software, but we don't know how to build it yet. We don't know what features or functions are going to go in there. So we need to collaborate and build it out piece by piece and make changes along the way. So the Agile Manifesto came out of that and is really the basis of all those frameworks or methods that are out there today. Scrum, extreme programming, feature-driven development, and they all have influencing factors over a lot of what we're doing in project management now, even in a predictive environment. So the Agile Manifesto basically states individuals and interactions over processes and tools. They're not saying processes and tools are not necessary. What the Agile Alliance was saying is that we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. If you've ever gone to your management and said, hey, this isn't working, and can we change it? And they say no, and you say, yeah, but, and they're like, yeah, but no. That's not how that works in Agile. We're using empirical knowledge. We're going with what we know now. We're interacting with individuals. We're having conversations, and we're saying, that isn't working. Let's change it. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Heavy documentation without a usable result is an epic waste of time. And so we want to produce software, but what we don't want to do is spend a lot of time on the front end plotting out how to do something we don't know how to do. So unlike a predictive project where you say it's a bicycle, we can plan toward it and set baselines. Instead, we're going to focus on an emergent design. Customer collaboration over contract negotiations. We want to be able to make changes. We want the customer to be able to look at a software program that's being developed and go, ooh, I want that instead. Rather than being stuck with this contract that we don't want to breach because it very specifically states X, Y, Z. That doesn't mean there aren't contracts in Agile. There are, but they're much more flexible and malleable and able to be adapted based on what the customer wants. And then responding to change over following a plan. This isn't working, let's change it. And in a predictive environment, it's like, no, there's a plan. You have to go through formal change control to update this. So assess the impact, come up with a solution, let's get sign off, blah, blah, blah. In an Agile environment, they're like, no, this needs to change. We're just going to change it. Cool? All right. The product backlog is the equivalent of your scope of work on an Agile project. In essence, it is all the features and functions and things that are prioritized by what is most valuable to the organization and to the customer. It's dynamic though, because the customer sees things and goes, "Oh, I want this instead," or "Can you move that there?" Or just functionality needs to be adjusted based on the architecture of what the team is building. And so the dynamic backlog is constantly changing and updated. So it exists as long as the product exists, right? Because there might be new features and functions. Think about all your software. Microsoft 365 pushes out updates, pushes out bug fixes, but it also pushes out new features. And that's because the backlog is still active. So any fixes, enhancements, and so on. The backlog is owned by the product owner. And essentially, they play the role of the project manager on an Agile project. They're the ones collecting all the requirements. They're the ones that own the backlog. And they're the ones that are going to prioritize the features and functions that are absolutely necessary to provide the most value. And so one of the things that gets utilized or discussed is something called Moscow mnemonic. This requirement must be in the final solution no matter what. This should be in there, but success doesn't necessarily rely on it. We could remove it if we needed to. If it doesn't affect anything, maybe the customer wants something, blingy in there, and you're like, all right, we could do that. Or won't. We're not doing that either in this release or whatever. It's just going to keep getting pushed down and getting replaced with higher priority items that the product owner feels are most necessary for the customer value to be reached. The other conversations that we might be having are based on can-you analysis, where it's like voice of the customer. What do we think that the customer wants from this, let's say, software program? And so delighters and exciters are things that are new features and functions. So if you think about a brand new cell phone that's coming out, there's always something new, right? Either they move the headphone jack, or the camera's better, or whatever goes in there where people are like, take my money, and they line up around the block, right? Those are delighters and exciters. Satisfiers are valuable. They have to be there. So it doesn't matter if the camera on the cell phone is amazing. If it doesn't make a phone call, they're going to be dissatisfied, right? Over time, though, delighters and exciters become satisfiers, hence the multiple reversions of technology with brand new features and functions. Dissatisfiers, well, if we put this in here, will the majority of people dislike it? Can't please everybody all the time, right? But the bulk. Indifferent, I don't care. There's a compass app on my phone, I don't care. I'm completely indifferent. Unless I get lost in the woods, and then probably that's going to be a satisfier. But for the most part, there are going to be things in every release that have no impact whatsoever. So this allows the conversation generation. It allows us to start plotting out what work we're going to do. And in a lot of cases, we're going to use a Kanban board to help move work from here's what we're going to do to done. And so Kanban, signboard or billboard in Japanese, or in English, queue limitation, is a scheduling system for just-in-time production. And Kanban was started at Toyota when they came over to the United States to see what American car manufacturers were doing. They walked into a grocery store when they were stocking the shelves, and they saw future supply is guaranteed. If you pull something off the shelf, there's another one behind it. And so they took that philosophy back to Toyota and said, okay, we need a queue limitation. We've got the work that we're going to do, but we're only going to pull a certain amount into progress. We're going to keep work in progress limited in such a way that we're working on things and then moving them to done and then pulling more work in. So a simple Kanban board shows the workflow from the backlog all the way to done or deploy. And it's very easy to read. It's very easy to use. And anybody can look at that and say, here's what's being developed and here's what's done. Kanban completely changed the way that I schedule. I love it. So easy. Considerations, though, for adaptive or agile environments, you want to make sure, just like on any project, you're having regular interactions with your stakeholders, and aggressive, transparent communication to accelerate information sharing. That doesn't mean aggressive. It just means very transparent. Here's what's going on, because there's this high degree of change. It's, you're constantly in flux. So the more you communicate, and the more you invite stakeholders to meetings, and the more people over process, collaboration, over contract negotiations, and those are going to be things that help streamline. So it could be maybe a daily stand-up meeting where the team gets together and says, here's what I did yesterday to help meet the team goal. Here's what I'm going to work on today. Here's what impediments are in my way. It's an informational only. Co-locating, hopefully soon, so the team can get face-to-face. Scheduled sessions like milestone reviews or lessons learned, refinement sessions, things like that. Agile just is much more collaborative. That might be uncomfortable for some teams who are first starting into the Agile realm, but it's okay. You're going to learn, you're going to improve. Change is part of Agile, and change for the better, or what we call Kaizen, continuous improvement, is important. Then we have review. So a review in an Agile environment is much like the validate, scope, process, and predictive, where you're getting a sign off of something. You're getting approval that you did what you were supposed to be doing. You built the right thing. In a review, it's very casual. It's informal. It sounds formal, but it's not. But essentially, the team and the customer and other stakeholders will all get together, and the development team will say, look, here's what we built. This is the increment. Here's type, spell check, and print. And the product owner will discuss what's currently in the backlog that's coming up next. It's rising up to the must. Likely completion dates, other conversations, testing, demos. And inevitably, the customer will see something and they are going to go, ooh, I want that instead. I want that next. And that's going to happen in the reviews. Excellent information. A lot like a lessons learned meeting, where you can then take that information and really collaborate and make the best decisions going forward, rather than having a front-loaded plan that inevitably you have to follow and go through formal change control. You're also looking at the marketplace. What's the most valuable thing to do next? And inevitably, the product backlog is going to get updated. It's going to get adjusted. It's a living, breathing thing. And in those reviews, we're discussing, hey, what should we do next? What's working? What's not? Immediately after that, the team, just the team, will go into what's called a retrospective, where it's like a lessons learned meeting as well. You're looking back at the last iteration and you're saying, what did we do really well? What did we not do really well? What are we going to change going forward? Because what that does is allows for continuous improvement. It allows us to focus forward with the information that we've just gotten from the recent past. That could be better ways to hold retrospectives and reviews. That could be better ways to execute project work together, communicate, whatever that is. We want to pick 2 to 3 things that we're going to try and implement going forward for continuous improvement. Rather than a lessons learned meeting where the project's over and you're like, yeah, that went sideways. We won't do that next time. You are now in the moment practicing continuous improvement. Retrospectives, daily stand-up meetings, reviews, even if you're just trying to incorporate some of these best practices into your predictive projects, I guarantee you that once your team practices and once they get used to it, you have this hybrid type of project going on, that your projects will inevitably be more effective. You'll be able to manage changes much more effectively, and you'll be able to focus forward on continuous improvement. So hopefully you'll try some of those things out today if you're not using them already. And if you are using them already, you already know the power of some of those Agile best practices on managing changes on your projects.